Hello, everyone, welcome to Earth Archives. Since the invention of currency, there has never been a shortage of robberies, especially after the emergence of banks. Many movies have also used robberies as material, such as the Argentine version of the big robbery of the century that I am going to talk about today. Robbery is an example. Let's take a look at the actual robbery process. Before the show starts, please subscribe, share, and turn on the little bell. Picture this. It's 2006, and the streets of Buenos Aires, Argentina, are buzzing with life. But amidst the hustle and bustle, a group of daring thieves sets their sights on the Banco Rio branch in the heart of the capital. Little did they know, their heist would go down in history as one of the most famous and brilliantly executed bank robberies ever seen. The way these bandits pulled off the robbery and the events that followed left everyone astonished. Real case history. Imagine the scene. February 13, 2006, Argentina. It's like something out of a blockbuster heist movie. 5 armed-to-the-teeth bandits storm into the Banco Rio branch in San Isidro, Buenos Aires, packing explosives and ready for action. They don't mess around, taking 23 hostages, including bank staff and customers. Word gets out fast, and before you know it, over 200 cops swarm in, surrounding the bank from every angle. They're not taking any chances. To prevent the robbers from forcing the bank staff to open the vault, they cut off the power. It's a tense standoff that lasts nearly 7 hours. But when the cops finally bust in, ready to take down the bad guys, they find nothing. The robbers and millions in cash, along with priceless items from 145 safety deposit boxes, have vanished into thin air. Now, here's the kicker. All 23 hostages are safe and sound. But when the cops start asking questions, not a soul knows how the robbers slipped away. That is until they stumble upon a secret tunnel in the bank's basement leading to the sewage system. Turns out, the robbers had made their grand escape through the tunnels a cool 3 hours before the cops even stormed in. With the sheer scale of the loot and the slickness of the operation, this heist goes down in Argentine history as the heist of the century. Robbery members of the heist of the century. The initiator of the big robbery, Araujo. Meet Araujo, a free-spirited artist with a penchant for Mary Jane. In the real world, Araujo was just like that, growing his own premium stash of weed. He even blacked out the windows of his loft to shut out the world. While delving into Eastern philosophy, Araujo harbored a secret obsession with bank heists. He devoured every movie, TV show, and documentary he could find, searching for inspiration and pitfalls for his perfect crime. To fuel his creativity, he'd listen to Mozart and Beethoven, but when he needed a boost of adrenaline, he'd crank up Bank Robber. Araujo bounced his crazy ideas off his buddy Bolster, aka the mechanic, in their heist plans. The mechanic of the heist, Bolster. Since high school, Bolster had been friends with Araujo, but he always saw their talk about robbing banks as nothing more than a joke, especially coming from his friend, who smoked a lot of weed. Growing up in upper-class families in Argentina, the two couldn't be more different. Araujo chased quirky, and occasionally illegal, ventures, while Bolster was a law-abiding homebody. His main gig was fixing small engines, motorcycles and jet skis. When Araujo floated the idea of robbing a bank, maybe it was Bolster's mechanical prowess that came to mind, but Bolster didn't take it seriously. Both his father and grandfather had lost money in investments pitched by banks. Well, it's about time I took it back. If Araujo could assure him that the heist wouldn't involve violence, if they didn't even carry weapons, he'd join in, a reasoning he used to convince himself to sign up. The finance owner of the big robbery, Mario. In order to fund their bank heist plan, Araujo sold his car and invested about $5,000, but as expenses soared, they needed an investor. Eventually, they were introduced to a notorious Uruguayan thief nicknamed the Doctor. Mario had the cash, the thieving style, and the know-how. Back in the 1990s and early 2000s, the wiry Vic would climb buildings to rob apartments. He was Buenos Aires' very own Spider-Man. When Araujo laid out his plan to Mario, the Doctor was already considering retirement. He had a nice home and led a comfortable life, but, once a thief, always a thief, he said. Crime's too sweet to pass up. So, he invested about $100,000 into the plan, quickly solving their financial woes. These are just a few of the key players in the dream team of Heist, making a total of 6 in the crew. This crew was all about how to steal a bank. Araujo's years of scheming focused on slipping into a bank unnoticed. Finally, he hit upon the idea of using tunnels. The outskirts of Buenos Aires were laced with vast tidal tunnels flowing beneath the streets and into the rivers. Araujo figured all he needed to do was find one that could lead him close to the riverbank he wanted and then dig up to the bank's vault. For months leading up to the heist, Bolster would drive his truck to a spot near where a massive drainage tunnel emptied into the La Plata River, just off the beaches of Peru. Around 9:30 every night, he'd sneak in, navigating the labyrinth of drainage networks, hiking for about half an hour to get to a spot near the bank where he'd start work, right under a manhole cover in the street. For a tech geek like Bolster, every problem had a solution. Take, for example, figuring out the right angle from the underground tunnel to the bank's foundation. So, what's the solution? Math, of course. Bolster knew that with the lengths of two sides of a triangle, he could calculate the exact angle, from the street to the bottom of the canal and from the tunnel to the outer wall of the riverbank. Now that they'd sorted out where to dig, how far, and at what angle, they needed to figure out what to do once they got into the bank's underground vault. That meant figuring out how to open the safes. So, they figured if they had a practice opportunity, it'd be much easier. Araujo went to a nearby branch of the Rio Bank and rented a box, noting the brand, then bought some boxes from the manufacturer to practice with. But how to get the stuff out of the vault? If it was cash and valuables as Araujo imagined, there was no way to haul the loot out by hand. A boat was feasible, specifically an inflatable rubber dinghy. But the water level in the sewer canals was shallow. A raft loaded with people and money would sink. But that was no problem for the mechanic, Bolster. He'd build a dam to raise the water level. He designed one in his shop using wood, then dismantled it, spending several nights installing it in the canal. Their seemingly perfect bank heist plan was mapped out, but there was one obstacle that bothered Araujo more than the rest. How would he disable the bank's alarm system when they entered? The only viable solution added to the complexity, they initially planned to wear bulky protective suits, complete with steel rings, to evade the heat sensors. So, on a workday when the alarm wasn't set, they had to go in. What would they do then? Before the heist, they didn't have a clue about how much dough they could rake in. But Araujo did some math. He looked back to a safe-cracking gig back in '97 for his ballpark figure. In that caper, crooks cracked open 167 boxes and bagged a cool $25 million in cash. Crunching the numbers, factoring in some inflation, Araujo figured the 400 boxes at the Rio de Janeiro bank could yield a whopping $60 million. Now, with a payday like that dangling in front of them, who wouldn't get a little antsy? Especially when you've got a gang of brainiac crooks behind a plan that seems airtight. The details of the heist of the century. On the day of the heist, February 13, 2006, the 5 members of the gang were prepping for their roles in the upcoming show. On the way to the bank, they smeared glue on their fingertips to avoid leaving prints at the scene. Then, they hopped into the stolen car from earlier that morning, with another team member waiting at the sewer entrance for the grand finale. First to step into the bank was Beto, decked out in a baggy lab coat, playing the part of a doc, followed by the doctor, wearing a ski mask. Meanwhile, Mario and another gang member pulled into the bank's underground garage. Araujo and mechanic Bolster lugged the power drills and other tools into the bank, locking the garage door behind them and blocking it with a car. Then, they joined the others upstairs, pretending to be part of the impending heist. Upstairs, Mario sported a fake beard and a custom-made suit, topped with a little bowler hat. His job was to stall, buying time for the basement crew to empty the boxes, making the cops think they were dealing with an amateurish robbery gone wrong. According to plan, Mario released the bank's armed guard and told negotiators, "This proves we're the good guys." He claimed to be releasing his greatest enemies. But the real motive was Araujo didn't want any real tools inside the bank that might escalate the situation. The premise was to avoid creating any real threats. They released the second and third hostages as part of Araujo's psychological strategy, making it seem like progress was being made and buying themselves time. Araujo wanted the police to think they had them cornered. "We must appear nervous and stupid, as if out of control," he told his team. "And those watching at home must sympathize with us. Some of the released hostages should buy goodwill." Meanwhile, down in the basement, the air cannon did its job swiftly. Araujo planned to give himself only 2 hours. As soon as he knocked through the wall to let the air cannon in, he started his stopwatch. It took 20 minutes to assemble the cannon, but soon he was cracking safes at a rapid pace, maintaining that speed for most of the 90 minutes. Before long, the loot piled up around him. Araujo knew they couldn't linger. When it was time to go, they tidied up, sprayed bleach, hoping to destroy any remaining DNA. They crawled back through the hole, leaving behind a homemade bomb, another fake, and wedged a heavy cabinet over the opening, making the room look untouched, just another unused storage space for anyone entering. When the SWAT team finally stormed the bank robbers were already on TV, counting cash, eating pizza, and popping champagne. The news coverage of the operation was delayed by 30 minutes. Luckily, mobile networks weren't as advanced then, or there would have been no place for their faces, because they believed the crooks might be monitoring the bank's internal feeds and didn't want to tip them off about the sudden raid. They thought they could outsmart the thieves. The day after, Araujo collected all the credit cards they found in the safes and scattered them around various drains in the area, far from the actual exit used by the gang. These evidences forced the police to investigate the wrong blocks and generated dozens of false leads, as detectives had to follow up every time a stolen card was used. Their power and energy were diluted, Araujo proudly recalled. Our advantage was huge. According to news reports, the gang of mysterious thieves, immortalized on local TV, fled with nearly tens of millions of dollars in cash and valuables, leaving behind no clues for the cops on the scene. And that's the lowdown on the Century Bank heist, the largest theft in Argentine history, where no one was nabbed on the spot, and later hailed as a classic high IQ crime. Solve the heist of the century. The bust of the case can be called a miracle where God closed all doors for the Argentine authorities but left them a window. One member of the gang, Beto, got reported to the cops by his lady, who spilled the beans on his role in the heist and tipped him off that he and his new girlfriend were planning to skip town. 5 weeks after the big score, Beto and his girlfriend were driving when the cops forced his new Dodge pickup to a stop on the roadside. He knew that was it. Soon after, the cops started sniffing around Beto and his buddies, Araujo, Bolster, and Mario. Not long after Mario, dressed in a grey suit, was interrogated and tossed in jail, his lawyer found a legal loophole. He wasn't an Argentine citizen, so as long as he left the country and never came back, he'd be eligible for half his sentence. So, in 2013, Vit was deported to Uruguay, serving only 4 years behind bars. Later, this pro relocated to the small town of San Jose de Mayo, outside Montevideo, his hometown. He married a much younger woman, had a son, and opened a jewelry store named Emerald. Mechanic, Bolster got the shortest stint, just 25 months. He copped to his involvement under pressure but was only convicted of helping build the tunnel, never publicly admitting his part in the heist. He always played it coy. He'd say, "The judge said it was me, the judge is always right, so I guess I was in on it." The last to be nabbed was Araujo, arrested by forest rangers at a remote camping ground deep in a wilderness park, fitting his artistic persona. In the end, our mastermind behind the Century Bank heist, Araujo, got sentenced to 1 year and 7 months. When he got out, he went back to his styling art. In the aftermath of this heist, the stolen amount remains a tantalizing mystery, somewhere between $8 million to $25 million. Despite the police managing to recover $1.17 million and 8 kilograms of jewelry, the exact extent of the loss will forever be shrouded in uncertainty. Thanks to the bank's theft insurance, customers affected by the robbery will have their losses compensated by the bank. But just like the Bank of the Century heist abroad, the real loss figure remains an enigma. What do you think about this story? Please leave your comments. See you in the next episode.